Welcome to the Black Gods Podcast. This is a space created for healing, remembrance, and restoration within the Black community. This podcast exists because many of us are carrying wounds we did not create, burdens we did not choose, and patterns we were conditioned into long before we had language for them. Here we slow down, we breathe, we tell the truth without shaming ourselves or one another. This podcast is rooted in the understanding that healing for Black people must be holistic. We are not just addressing the mind or just the body or just the spirit. We are addressing all of it together because our experiences have always been layered. What affects us mentally often affects us physically. What affects us emotionally often affects us spiritually. And what affects us spiritually eventually shows up in the body. The Black Gods Podcast is about shadow work. Shadow work is not about tearing yourself down or reliving trauma endlessly. It is about gently bringing awareness to the parts of ourselves that were shaped by survival, fear, conditioning, and historical pressure. It is about understanding why certain behaviors, beliefs, and emotional responses exist instead of judging ourselves for having them. Many of us were raised in environments where emotional awareness was not taught, where vulnerability was unsafe, and where silence was often mistaken for strength. Shadow work allows us to look at those learned patterns with compassion. It allows us to ask, where did this come from, instead of what's wrong with me? This podcast is also about healing. Healing does not mean perfection. Healing does not mean pretending things never happened. Healing means learning how to regulate our nervous systems, how to feel safe in our own bodies, and how to respond instead of react. It means learning how to rest without guilt, how to set boundaries without fear, and how to reconnect with ourselves after generations of disconnection. A core truth behind this podcast is that many of the struggles within our community did not happen by accident. We live within systems that were not designed with our well-being in mind, systems that affect our food, our healthcare, our education, our labor, and our mental health. When we acknowledge this, it does not make us powerless. It gives us clarity. This podcast does not exist to create paranoia or hopelessness. It exists to create awareness. Awareness is the first step towards sovereignty. When you understand the environment you are living in, you can begin making choices that support your health instead of constantly reacting to harm. We will talk about how chronic stress, environmental factors, and generational trauma affect the Black body and mind. We will talk about how constant pressure, vigilance, and survival mode impact our nervous systems. We will talk about how these stressors can contribute to common illnesses within our communities, not as a way to assign blame, but as a way to empower informed care. This podcast also honors the role of herbs and traditional plant wisdom as supportive tools for wellness. For centuries, our ancestors relied on the earth for nourishment, regulation, and balance. Herbs were used to calm the mind, support digestion, ease inflammation, regulate the nervous system, and promote overall vitality. This knowledge was practical, accessible, and rooted in observation and experience. In this space, herbs are discussed responsibly. They are not presented as cures or replacements for medical care, but as supportive allies. We talk about herbs as tools for balance, tools that can help support the body as it heals from stress, poor nutrition, and environmental strain. The goal is not to reject modern medicine, but to remember that wellness is not one-dimensional. Food and nourishment will also be discussed through a conscious lens. Many of our communities have been flooded with low-quality, highly processed foods that strain the body over time. This podcast explores how food impacts mood, energy, inflammation, and long-term health, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of choice and awareness. We recognize that access matters. We recognize that time, money, and availability all affect what people can realistically do. This podcast does not promote extremes. It promotes sustainability, small shifts, informed decisions, gentle improvements that compound over time. The Black Gods Podcast is also about spiritual grounding. Spirituality here is not about dogma or fear-based belief. It is about connection to self, to ancestors, to intuition, and to purpose. Spirituality, when healthy, is a stabilizing force. It helps people make meaning out of hardship. It helps people remember who they are beneath labels and limitations. This podcast holds space for spirituality as a personal experience. There is no one way to connect. There is no one path to healing. What matters is integrity, self-honesty, and alignment. Spirituality should support your mental health, not override it. It should help you feel more embodied, not dissociated. We also acknowledge the importance of community healing. Many of us were taught to handle everything alone, to be strong at all costs, to push through exhaustion, but isolation is not strength. Healing happens in safe spaces where truth can be spoken without punishment. This podcast aims to be one of those spaces, a place where difficult conversations can happen without hostility, a place where reflection is encouraged, a place where growth is normalized. Not every episode will be comfortable, but every episode is intended to be constructive. We will talk about emotional patterns that repeat across generations. We will talk about how survival strategies can turn into self-sabotage when they are no longer needed. We will talk about how to gently release what no longer serves you without rejecting yourself in the process. This is not a podcast about blaming Black people for systemic harm. It is about understanding how systems influence behavior, health, and identity, and how awareness allows us to reclaim agency. Healing is not about pretending the system does not exist. It is about learning how to live well despite it. We will also emphasize the importance of rest. Rest is not laziness. Rest is repair. Chronic exhaustion is not normal, even if it has been normalized. The body cannot heal when it is constantly in fight or flight mode. Rest, regulation, and nourishment are revolutionary acts in a culture that profits from burnout. The Black Gods podcast encourages listeners to slow down and reconnect with their bodies, to notice tension, to notice fatigue, to notice emotions that have been suppressed for years. Healing begins with listening to yourself. This space also honors personal responsibility without shame. Once awareness is gained, choice becomes possible. Healing does not happen overnight. It happens through consistency, patience, and compassion for yourself. This podcast does not demand perfection, it supports progress. Above all, this podcast is about remembrance. Remembering that we come from people who adapted, survived, and preserved knowledge under extreme conditions. Remembering that resilience does not mean ignoring pain. It means transforming it. The Black Gods podcast exists to support that transformation, to offer language for experiences many could feel but not name, to offer tools that are accessible, grounded, and rooted in care, to remind you that healing is not a destination, it is a relationship with yourself. If you are listening to this and something resonates, you are not alone, you are not broken. You are responding to your environment and your history, and with awareness, support, and intention, healing is possible. This podcast is an invitation to learn, an invitation to reflect, an invitation to choose yourself in small, meaningful ways, an invitation to reclaim your body, your mind, and your spirit at your own pace. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and thank you for choosing healing. This is the Black Gods podcast.